Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 378, and today's guests are two of the co-founders of Copley, that being David Henriquez, CEO, and Sean Marshall, Chief Operating Officer. It is just a necessity for any thriving tech ecosystem. You need companies at scale and people from those companies to take their learnings and go off to start their own company. HubSpot has been a big feeder of alumni who have gone off to start companies, and you're starting to see the next wave with founders coming from Toast and now Klaviyo. What's even better is when you see the founders of these anchor tech companies fund the next generation of entrepreneurs. David and Sean were part of the hypergrowth scale-up years at Klaviyo that ultimately led to a pillar public tech company in the Boston tech scene. David held a variety of engineering and sales engineering roles, whereas Sean led global sales. Now they are building a new company with a third co-founder and CTO, Mike Tora, called Copley. It is an AI-powered content optimization platform that allows marketers to quickly create, test, and deploy content everywhere. Copley recently announced a $4.8 million pre-seed round of funding led by Asymmetric and Underscore. And yes, the founders of Klaviyo, Andrew Bielecki and Ed Hallen, are investors. Plus, they also have Tom Ebling and Jeffrey Barnett of Demandware, which was acquired by Salesforce. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like startup fundraising advice for first-time founders and the importance of building long-term relationships with investors, the background stories for both David and Sean, the explosive growth years and what they experienced at Klaviyo, the full story of Copley in terms of the problem that they are solving and their unique approach to finding early adopter customers, go-to-market advice for early-stage startups and the importance of storytelling, and so much more. All right, now a brief word from our podcast sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with David and Sean. David and Sean, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I'm excited to talk to you guys. So I don't know how many episodes I've done with both, two co-founders in one podcast, which always makes it a more stories to tell. So I think this might be, I don't know, third or fourth that I've done this. So I'm excited because we're going to talk about Copley, which is a newly funded startup you recently announced. So there's a lot to talk about what you guys are up to. But before we get into all the details about Copley, as first-time founders, raising capital is difficult, especially in this climate. So I thought it'd be a good starting point to discuss how you went about the process and what recommendations or advice you'd have for first-time founders.
Yeah, so we had a really kind of untraditional funding story. We knew some local investors, and through our connections and network at Klaviyo, we were introduced originally to Rob at Asymmetric Capital. And, I got to know him as I was leaving Klaviyo. A lot of people from Klaviyo had tried to introduce me to him for a while. And my answer was always kind of like, not quite ready yet, still doing the Klaviyo thing. But when the time's right, I'll take an introduction. And I think that was like a good intro from investors' perspective, right? Like they want to see people that are so focused on the product and the desire to solve something. They're not just out there like trying to raise money all the time. Like they're actually just busy working. And it's almost like kind of hard to get to them. And then when we met with them, it just seemed like I think they were a really good fit for us personality wise, and not really been too stressed about trying to raise money. It made the process one of which we kind of just found a partnership, something that worked out for both of us. I think the advice I would give to founders who are trying to raise or who are interested in raising is that, I know that the climate is kind of tough right now, especially with compared to like years previous. But the good news is there are so many tools and resources and things that are available to you today to bootstrap and get something off the ground faster, to where the default for companies now is to raise less money. Like 5, 10 years ago, it was like raise an A round, then that leads to a B, leads to a C, leads to a D. At Klaviyo, we had always been really financially conservative with money, and we're never really raising out of necessity. And I think that's the new meta of companies is you don't actually need to raise money because you have a good idea and you can bootstrap it. Maybe you do some consulting with your first, potential customers, and they're paying you, a retainer or something to just like get it going. And it's really just to be as resourceful as possible, build as much product you can, and just be really, really scrappy.
Well, one of the key points that I'm gathering from this is build these relationships early so that you're not all of a sudden scrambling to start building these relationships when you actually need to raise capital. But how did Rob know, or how did people know that you were potentially building something to even foster that relationship early on?
Yeah, so I've known Rob for probably close to 10 years now. Him and I got connected back when I was at Localytics, another Boston company, and I was running a sales team there. And we got connected through a mutual friend. At the time, Rob was running Catalent as CEO. And I considered going to work with him, and it didn't work out. I chose not to go there, but we had kept in touch, and we stayed close over the years. So whether it be sharing deals back and forth, he was doing a little investing, I had been investing a little bit, and just like kind of staying close and making sure he knew what I was up to and I knew what he was up to. And after I had left Klaviyo, he had actually started Asymmetric Capital before I left. But when I left, we reconnected, and I ended up advising companies in their fund. So helping them on go to market, helping them go from 0 to 1. And, during that journey, David, Mike, myself got together, decided we were going to go do this thing called Copley. And Rob was excited. Rob was very excited. So Rob had an unfair advantage because he was already kind of in the network. And so he was the first one that we spoke to about taking external cash.
Again, goes back to what I was saying of just got to build these relationships. They're so key. And, it was years in the making of this funding to come together. So I think that's an important lesson learned.
Yeah. The one thing I would say about what your point about relationships is, I've noticed founders get to a point in their journey where they want to raise money. They're starting to think about raising money, and it feels like this point in time sort of transactional thing that you do. A lot of these venture partners, they're thinking about building a relationship sometimes over 2 years. Like I said, I had known Rob for years. It's been almost 10 years at this point. But a lot of these partners are building relationships early, like when people are just thinking of an idea and thinking they may want to go start a company down the line. So it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't even happen in 2 to 3 months. This can take 12 to 24 months of getting to know someone. And who you choose to bring into your company is very consequential. It's an important decision, and it can help you a ton. It can also hurt your company. So be very intentional and careful, who you choose to raise from.
All right, well, let's rewind the clock. So we'll talk about your background stories before Klaviyo. David, you go first.
I originally, like really young, got into computing when I was like 7, 8 years old. I had a friend who taught me how to use basic programming language. So we used to make choose your own adventure games, and we would have our other, students in the classroom play them all through middle school growing up. So I really loved computers when I was young. After college, was working with my late father-in-law at his commercial real estate company, learned a lot about sales, thought it was really interesting, but was always kind of curious about using more technology in sales. Ended up at a company called the Stowe Group that I think, we have some mutual connections from.
Amazing people.
Yeah, when we were there, really, I was just slamming the phones. Like that was kind of the mantra back then, right? And you're just like making cold calls all day and you're just grinding phones all the time. So built up really thick skin built up a lot of communication skills. But also in the back of my mind, I always felt like, there could be a little bit more we could be doing. And around that time, HubSpot was fairly prolific in the Boston area. And I learned about their concept of inbound marketing, using content, conversion optimization on your website, was really interested in it. Ended up joining HubSpot, only worked there for a pretty short amount of time. I had an interesting experience there, but I learned a ton. So I kind of considered like working at HubSpot for that time as almost like getting an MBA. I used to read like everything in Salesforce I could, from like what all of the top reps were doing, all the conversations, like everything was tracked and everything was super transparent. So I thought it was incredible working at this company where I could read through all of the history of the wikis and all of the discussions, and everything that the company had done was just like publicly available, well, not publicly, but available to all the employees to go through and read. And I would do that all the time. And I learned so much about the company, about software. From there, I ended up taking what I was doing at HubSpot and running sales at a digital agency. So at Blue Coda, I joined, we were a small business. We were doing websites, a lot of professional services websites, law firms, colleges, et cetera. I kind of pivoted us more towards technology companies. So a company would raise a Series A, Series B round, still kind of the case today. What happens right after a company raises a big round of funding? They hire a VP or a head of marketing. That person wants to build a new website. So we would reach out, we would get in the pipeline, we would close some of these deals. And that's where I really felt that kind of passion for technology reappear. And I decided, you know what, the next thing I want to do, I'm going to pivot, go back to technology, go back to startups. And that's where I started. I was a single employee reporting to the chair of the board for a startup for a small amount of time right after that. That was a really interesting experience, super scrappy, pre-product, pre-everything, just kind of trying to prove out product market fit. And then from there, I was kind of just wearing every hat at that company. From there, just pivoted completely, went to software engineering, worked as a software engineer for a year at a medical image company. And then actually we just hired someone who I worked with there. So she was an eighth employee. So yeah, that was a great contact I made there. And then, from there was a product engineer, and then brought me to Klaviyo.
All right, Sean, so what's your journey?
My journey is not, I didn't meander as much. So I've been in sales pretty much my whole career. Didn't plan to go into sales. I actually went to school. I went to Bentley University nearby in Waltham, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Knew I wanted to be in tech. I always loved tech. My father always worked in tech. He worked at Oracle in the 80s when they were a really small startup. And he's been an executive, for years, been a CEO of a handful of companies. So I always loved tech, and I knew I wanted to do something in tech, but didn't know what that was. Ended up getting a job at Oracle out of college as a consultant. I think I lasted 6 months, just for a bunch of reasons. Wasn't for me. I went back to my dad and had a pretty blunt discussion with him about why I hated Oracle, why I wanted to leave. And I just didn't know what was for me. I thought maybe I'd go into engineering. I early on, dabbled with coding when I was young. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And turns out, my personality, I just have a high sense of urgency. I'm very passionate about certain things. If I enjoy something, I naturally want to talk about it and get other people excited about it. And I'm just very competitive. So sales felt obvious. My dad was actually the one who was like, you should be in sales. So started at a Series A company called Success Factors right after Oracle. I ended up staying there for about 6 years. I was a BDR, ran BDR teams, went into sales, and had a great run. That company went public, and then they got acquired by SAP. I moved over to Yammer, which was a startup in San Francisco, started by David Sachs, and was an enterprise sales rep remotely for them, selling it to the Fortune 500. We had a great run. We got acquired by Microsoft.
It was basically Slack, right? Yammer?
It was before Slack. The year we got acquired, I think Slack 2012, I think Slack came around. So same concept, very different UI, UX, but similar concept. Yeah, very similar. So I left Microsoft. I think I lasted again 7 or 8 months. I just realized larger businesses for a few reasons are just not where I enjoy spending my time. I get bored. I want to move fast, and I felt a little bit stuck in Microsoft. So I left Microsoft, joined Localytics in Boston. I think that was 2013 or 2013. Ran a sales team there for about 5 years, and then found my way to Klaviyo in 2018. And we had a great run at Klaviyo. Happy to go into that more, but yeah, that was my journey.
All right, now let's talk about Klaviyo, which is such a great success story, an anchor tech company in the Boston tech scene. So how did the two of you, I don't know who wants to go first or how that all came about, but how did you arrive at Klaviyo?
I can take it.
You go first.
Yeah,
You started.
So I ended up finding Klaviyo through a friend of mine, Steve White-Trekkie. So Steve, back in 2017, had been doing some consulting with Andrew Bielecki at Klaviyo, helping them with a variety of things, finance, marketing, sales, and ended up joining the company full time in late 2017. And I got a call from Steve sometime, it was probably January of 2018, saying, "Hey, you got to check this company out. It's right down the street from where you are. We're doing some really incredible things. The numbers are amazing. The product market fit is A plus. You got to come talk to us. And I need a head of sales." And I had no intention at that point of joining. I wanted to do Steve a favor and have the meeting with him and just see if I could help him out. And after that meeting, I walked away thinking, I need to do whatever I can to get into this company. It was just I had that feeling like I need to join this business. It was so obvious. The unit economics, even back then, were incredible. The growth was amazing. And a lot of that growth was inbound. It was almost entirely inbound, 100% inbound at that point. So all the signals were there that if they poured more gas in the fire, if they built a sales organization, went outbound, built a channel, this company could be something really great. And it already was great at that point, but it was very under the radar. So, so I discovered it through Steve White-Trekkie, still a great friend of mine. And that's how it came about. And then I hired David probably 4 or 5 months, maybe 6 months after I joined, and brought him onto the sales engineering team. And the one thing I'll say about people like David, Klaviyo did it very differently. We hired engineers and put them in these different roles throughout the company. So the engineers that we had on the sales side, they were sales engineers, but they were not traditional sales engineers. They were writing code. They understood our entire stack, and they were very, very, I would say, qualified engineers that wanted to be customer facing. And it was a very different approach at the time, but I think it was really effective, and it was a very tough role to hire for, finding these like customer facing engineers. But David was maybe our second at that point that we hired. And so that's how I got connected to him.
David, so when you started, what was the team like and the role?
Yeah. So at the time had just switched to engineering. I was pretty stubborn about wanting to be a product engineer. A bunch of people had reached out to me around different sales engineering jobs. And I was like, no, not even interviewing, not considering it. And then got in touch with Klaviyo through a recruiter, and same kind of experience. They were like, look, just trust me, just like take this call, like learn a little bit about this company. I had heard about Klaviyo a little bit. I knew Brian Whaley a bit, who had worked there at the time. And so I'd been following some of the posts he made, and they seemed like this like under the radar company, but like maybe it could be interesting. So I was like, all right, I'll take this interview. Same kind of experience as Sean. Met the team like within like 15, 20 minutes. I think it was Sean that I first talked to. He was explaining to me the traction and what was going on. As I dug into it, it didn't take much at all. Like you saw right away, like, wow, this is like a really special company. And it went from me, feeling like, oh, I want to be a product engineer, to like immediately just being like, okay, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get this job. Interviewed, had an interesting interview experience. I think I like said some things I probably shouldn't have, because I wanted to be a real engineer still in my head. I was like, I don't want to just like give demos for like salespeople. Like I want to be like doing real stuff. Like I don't want to just like do the salesperson's job. And Sean's boss, Steve, was like, yeah, you probably shouldn't like say that in an interview with salespeople. Like you should probably like It's not really what we're looking for, like how interviews typically go. Then AB, the CEO at the time, was still interviewing everyone with engineer in their title. So he grilled me for like 2 hours on like algorithm questions. Thankfully, I had prepared a lot for that. But like, again, not a traditional engineering background, not like a computer science degree. So it was definitely kind of an intimidating process. And I was like, this is like completely unlike anything I've been through before. Got the job and then really wanted to just prove myself right away. Started working on building our Salesforce Commerce Cloud integration within like a month of starting. Worked on a lot of the different integrations we worked on, contributed really to all of our large customer deals over the first 2.5 years or so that I worked there. It was really fun. Like I supported every salesperson, so I got to see firsthand like every deal pre-sales through implementation, oftentimes through customer success. Like a lot of customers in the early days just like had my cell phone number because it was a scrappy like startup environment, and they wanted to know that like the person who helped them, the person who like helped write some code to get them implemented, was available for them. After about 2.5 years, I eventually got absorbed into the product engineering team. We had become like a bigger, more sophisticated company. And so like doing more cowboy stuff on the front lines wasn't really as cool anymore. And so I reported to the CTO, Alan Chavez, for like 2 years or so. It was an incredible experience. I got to learn a ton. Credit to AB, like he always like really believed in me and he wanted me to have a technical mentor. So reporting to Alan for 2 years, I learned a ton, and we rebuilt the entire developer experience at Klaviyo. So we did all the new APIs, SDKs, won an award from Postman for like best API for a communications and marketing company. It was a really awesome time. Got to learn a ton. And then spent a year doing the developer advocacy thing, kind of just like trying to get developers to use all the stuff we'd been building for a while. Ended up with like one of the most prolific developer ecosystems in the whole Shopify ecosystem. So was really a great run. And then I was just really looking forward to eventually being able to do our own thing. I was there a few weeks after the IPO, and then connected with Sean and my friend Mike, and we got started.
All right. Well, before we get into Copley, and that's a great foundational story that's going to parlay nicely into what you guys are up to now. But so Sean, so when you according to your LinkedIn, I mean, extraordinary numbers, right? The team was 15 or so when you joined. You grew that to 300 plus. The 25 million in annual recurring revenue to 450 million ARR. I mean, you had a great run with some other companies, but this, what was that experience like?
It was, I don't know, the word that comes to mind is insane. It was awesome. It was amazing, but it was insane. It was 4.5 years of feeling like you're 24/7 moving 200 miles an hour, and the business is changing right in front of you constantly. Things that might have worked really well today, 2 weeks from now, might be irrelevant. Like as a business, we just move really fast. So we had incredible product market fit. And, there's so many ways I can answer this question, getting into tactics and things that we did. But I learned more in my career at Klaviyo than, I had learned in the 15 preceding years at a bunch of companies. It was like the most challenging experience of my lifetime for sure. Most exciting, definitely the most stressful, but it's also the most fun. I had more fun at Klaviyo than I've ever had. And, it forced me to level up as a person, but also as like an executive in a bunch of areas. So it was an incredible, amazing ride. Yeah.
One thing I'll add to that, I don't think I've ever said this to Sean too, is Sean had an incredible eye for hiring. Like he hired, like you normally would think like 250, 300 people. Like I don't know how he had the network and the interviewing process that he had, but the people I worked with through my time there were absolutely A+ across the board. The team that he built was really like second to none.
Yeah, I mean, Klaviyo did a great job hiring, and you don't see a lot of attrition, so that speaks volumes of the company and the culture. I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, let's talk about Copley. So let's talk about the origin story, like kind of idea creation and what you're actually working on.
I mean, I can take it, you can take it, but you probably don't do a lot of these interviews with two people, two founders. So I'll start and then you can chime in. But so about 15, 16 months ago at this point, we had been, David and Mike were batting around this idea, like the origin idea of Copley. And I, at that point, was, looking to I was either considering starting a company or just doing a little bit more on the venture side because I had been investing for a while. And we ended up teaming up. And when we broke down what was needed in this market, and we were talking about the idea, and then we took a look at our backgrounds and our expertise, me on the go-to-market side, Mike and David on the engineering side, it just felt like we had to do this. It was like every box was checked and we felt like this was so obvious and we need to do it. And so the idea really sprouted from like what we felt and what we saw at Klaviyo. And David was more on the front lines than myself, but it was very clear at Klaviyo that the top brands, not even the top 1%, but like probably like the top 1% of the 1% behaved very differently than other brands. And, it became obvious to us as we started to like see these patterns and then talk to these brands more that they put content on a pedestal and they realized that their customers, the way they experience their brand it's through a screen. A lot of these e-commerce brands, they don't have stores. Some do, but the majority don't. So the way that they capture people's attention, the way that they get them interested, the way that they get them to buy and to come back is through a screen. And that could be their computer, it could be their phone. There's a lot of different digital mediums. It could be a billboard. But, these customers, these brands are trying to find new customers, get them interested, and get them to buy. And the vehicles they're using to do that are ads. They're sending emails, they're sending text messages. They might be advertising in out of home. They have a website and they're trying to create these experiences on their website. But content, they're just putting content in a bunch of different places. And so the best brands, they had essentially built these internal systems to make it really, really simple and fast to test new content all the time, like constantly. It wasn't a one-off thing. It was part of their DNA and they experimented with everything. So before they rolled out a piece of content to a large audience, it had already been tested maniacally in like a smaller group. And they had proven that this piece of content had performed really well. And then they would exploit it to a larger audience or to more channels. And it was obvious to us that like most brands can't do this. They don't have the people and they don't have the capital or the time to just go build these systems in-house. And there wasn't anything available in the market to address this problem. We saw a lot of fragmentation where individual platforms were like sprinkling in AI and trying to make it easier to optimize their respective channel, whether that's a website or an SMS product. We just looked at the problem differently, and we had seen the best of the best in how they thought about the problem. And they stepped back and they looked at the customer holistically and said, these customers are seeing, if they see an ad from us, those same people are going to see an email and those same people are going to go to our website. We have to be able to connect the dots and we have to like optimize this entire experience and build like this brain for our content that is always thinking about the right piece of content to put in front of someone on the right channel at the right time. And it just didn't exist. So we had talked a lot about that. It's a very complex problem and there's a lot of stuff that we want to go build, but David had experience working like with some of these customers that had built these systems in-house. In fact, one of them, hopefully over time will become an advisor to Copley, but he had a lot of firsthand experience where like customers were coming to him and asking like, what can we do more of? And what are the best brands doing? And how can we grow faster? And if we give you more money, like, can you help us go find customers? And it was pretty obvious that there was a void, and we wanted to go fix that. So
How did you get started, David, in terms of building out the platform, and like did you
Yeah,
talk to
sure.
customers? Like you were seeing this problem firsthand by witnessing it at Klaviyo, but when you actually moved on, it was like, okay, we're building something. Like what feedback did you get from customers to allow you to build what they needed?
Yeah, so we were really intentional about that. In fact, the first customers we worked with, we wanted it to be folks that didn't know us from Klaviyo. To Sean's point, we, did a lot. Like I worked a lot on the front lines for a lot of these customers. They were going to be biased towards liking me or liking us and, liking the idea. So we, through our network, found brands that didn't know us, that weren't really, doing all of these things yet, or like many of them. They were testing some things. They wanted to test more. They were doing some optimization in silos, but they weren't really like using the learnings from everywhere. So we got a handful of brands, and the way we looked at this was really like by taking a step back. So what we said was essentially like if we want to solve this purely for the customer, what are some of the constraints and like what are some of the things that are non-negotiables? And so like one of the things we talked about was like if you want to experiment with different content, you don't want to have to change customer behaviors. So if customers have a product launch that goes out at 1 p.m., you don't want to have to tell the customer like, oh, well, you have to test the content like the day before for that upcoming thing, because like the customer wants to launch at 1 p.m. Like that's going to happen. And so we were looking at ways to learn on an ongoing basis and take this learning for these one-off kind of like events, right? Like whether it's a big email send or whether it's like a big announcement. And we came up with this concept after talking to a lot of brands, working with one of our advisors who's a professor at MIT, and we developed a product around it called traits. And so what we do is we label content, and you can kind of think of this as an algorithm where you have these different inputs, and the inputs are different things that work well for your content, different things you want to experiment with for your content, and then inputs like your product, the offer you have. So you might say, oh, this for your brand, for your announcement, it works really well when there's a group of products instead of a single product. When there's people in the ad versus, not people in the ad. When they're outside, right? Maybe it's like a athleisure company or something like that. And then you have the product and then you have the offer. And when you combine all of those, you end up with content that performs really well. And then maybe 20% of the time you're testing something out. Maybe instead of outdoors, you're testing like indoors on like a tennis court or something like that. And so this concept of labeling content and then being able to reuse those labels to come up with winning combinations was something we thought was really valuable. And so for one of our first design partners, we took in all of their content across all of their emails and ads and other sources. We labeled all of it. We created this analysis that showed what content performed best for them. And then we took this video that they were going to run ads for. And actually, in this case, they'd been running this video for a long time already. And it was actually starting to show diminishing returns to the point where they were going to sunset it. So they'd spent a lot of money on video production. The ad ran for about 6 months, and they were pretty satisfied with it, right? It wasn't like they were upset or anything, but they were like, you know what? It's kind of run its course. We made enough off of it. We're going to end of life this. And we didn't know at the time, but that was the video they gave us to edit. So like they kind of made our job even harder without us knowing. They're like, here's the video, we've run it a bunch, but like we had just seen the performance data, recently, and we were focused on like the last 30 days and trying to improve it. At the time, they hadn't told us that like this was an older one. And so, now fortunately we go back with 5 years of data, so we wouldn't be tricked like that again. But at the time, we took this data and we put we used our labels to develop 3 variations of this video. And then we ran the video on Facebook. And out of 115 ads, that they were running on Facebook that month, within 4 days, the 3 video variations we had were in first place, third, and fourth out of 115 ads for
Wow.
ad spend.
That's
So it was
awesome.
just like a testament to the research we were doing and showing like certain, in this case, there were certain what we call it traits that showed outsized performance for their brand that they weren't really actually 100% sure about. They kind of thought like these might be good ideas. And then when we ran this experiment, it worked really well. And so that was kind of when we knew we were onto something. And from there, we've just been working on refining the product, making it like productionized so that we can release it to more and more companies with the goal of eventually being able to democratize this for everyone so that smaller businesses can self-serve, sign up themselves, be able to get going and using it. It's really user-friendly for them. But then mid-market and even lower enterprise companies can use it as well. And maybe there's some more advanced features and things that they can get from it. But, we want this to be something that not just the very top of the top companies that have built themselves can afford to do. We want to make it so that the whole range of e-com companies have access to this kind of technology to help grow their brand.
So, like, are you planning on, like, initially, and I'm sure it can go in lots of different directions, but from what I understand, and I could be wrong, Klaviyo, they really built their moat in the Shopify world, right? And that was bread and butter. Is that a similar philosophy here of working with the Shopify brands on their platform?
Yeah, so we're starting with brands on Shopify. I built our Commerce Cloud integration at Klaviyo. Our CTO, Mike Tora, he came from Salesforce Commerce Cloud. He brought a few of his engineers from Salesforce Commerce Cloud. They were working on Commerce Cloud Einstein. Mike had purview of all of Commerce Cloud, but also he even had some Marketing Cloud Einstein. So really, they were the AI team at Salesforce. So while it's like, yeah, we are focused on Shopify, we have that DNA in the company as well. So for now, we're really mostly focused on Shopify, but we are speaking to a handful of Commerce Cloud brands as well. It really just comes down to what is the goals of the organization and are they really focused on modernizing their company, using AI and using modern tools to experiment with content. A lot of times we find the Shopify brands that we're working with are very modern, moving fast. They're used to, using new apps, using new things, moving really quickly. And that's really the biggest limiting factor for us. Like we just want to make sure that we're working with brands who are forward looking, who are moving quickly and ready to try new software.
So originally, I believe you were named Hawk, and you changed the name to Copley, and you have Copley.com, which I'm like, one word domain is not easy to come by. So how did you come up with the brand and the domain?
Yeah. So our lawyers told us that Hawk would not fly. So
No pun intended.
No pun
no
intended.
pun
Yeah, no
intended.
pun intended.
So we first thought Hawk was a cool name. Sean came up with the name Hawk actually. I don't know if I'll tell you the name before Hawk. That we weren't allowed to use that name. No, it was going to be called Gargoyle. Me and Mike thought was an amazing name. One day when we start a video game company, maybe we'll call it Gargoyle. But we ended up going with Hawk because the idea was like, you're kind of like soaring above, you see all the data, you see everything, and you can drill in and like, really understand discrete things while taking like a bird's eye view. So we thought that was a cool name. Our lawyers looked into the marketing and ad tech space and just the general like, optimization, performance marketing space and said, there's no chance that you can use that name. And so we said, okay, we're going to have to, look at something else. And then it was really just like a thought experiment. We're all from Boston. We wanted to make it about Boston. AB at Klaviyo always kind of had a chip on his shoulder about like building Boston tech companies and building a strong scene here in Boston. And, like I say, it was like Boston against Silicon Valley, but, we wanted to kind of plant our flag and say that, Boston's an awesome city for tech. We have amazing education here. We have amazing companies and, you can do all the same things here with building great brands and building great businesses. And so we thought a lot about like, what would we want to be named? if we could have a local flair to it, but then if it had like a bigger meaning. And so the Copley medal is the longest awarded scientific medal for experimentation and for scientific achievement going back to the 1700s. It's still given out today. Einstein won the award. I forget some of the other people who won the award. Charles Darwin, like some of the biggest scientific minds of our time. So we thought that was really cool. There's, the Copley Mall. There's like the connection to Boston with Copley. And so we reached out to the person who owned the domain, and we
got it for a good price.
We were able to get it for what we thought was a really fair price. So we're not complaining about that. I don't know.
Yeah, we got lucky.
Yeah, I don't know if they're from Boston or if they know about Boston.
Yeah, I think Hawk.com wanted $5 million and we didn't pay anything. So we got a good price. Yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. All right. So as we highlighted already, you announced 4.8 million pre-seed from Asymmetric and underscore Lily Lyman from there. And then you also have, founders of Klaviyo and former CEOs of Demandware, which I think speaks volumes of the belief in what you guys are building when you have key, investors like that.
Yeah, we're really fortunate to be joined by a lot of great investors. Demandware is a company that we looked up to a lot from the Boston area. They have a lot of the top e-com companies using their platform. They were really like the first wave of companies building really good websites on a SaaS platform. Before that, you saw like a lot of the biggest names in e-com having to build custom things using legacy software. Demandware really, changed that a lot. They were a pillar company in this area. We've gotten to know Jeff Barnett and Tom Ebling from them really well. Mike Tora knew Barnett when he worked at Commerce Cloud. And, the founders of Klaviyo, AB and Ed, they both love to see people from Klaviyo go out and start companies. So, yeah, we've been really fortunate with that. We have a couple other Boston area investors as well. Mike Riegelman and John Moss, who ran S2 Security. John Moss, a very low-key, understated person, been an entrepreneur for the better part of 40 years, Boston area person. There's a few others, too, that work in the e-com space that heard about what we were doing, knew us from different places. We were happy to have them, on the cap table. It really, our view is, I think this is Lily's term, so I'm not going to steal this. I'll give her credit, but I think their quote is it takes a village. And they're trying to build a really good community of entrepreneurs and founders and operators. And we take the same approach. We want as much advice and as much different thoughts as possible to try and help us as we hit different challenges.
All right, Sean, one of the biggest challenges for companies is go to market, sales, especially startups. It can obviously make or break the company. So what advice would you have for early stage startups on building out their initial go to market or sales strategy?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time here. I mean, I've invested in advised in so many companies trying to go 0 to 1. And I would say one of the biggest mistakes I see is founders convince themselves that they either have traction or convince themselves they have some semblance of product market fit and want to immediately hire the salesperson to go do the rest of the job. And you just can't do that. So early on, one of the most important things that you can do, I think, as a founder selling your product, is get really good at storytelling and practice your story every day. Because in the grand scheme of things, your company has no credibility, you are nobody, and you have no customers, and you're trying to, pound your fist on the table and be loud and get people to listen, and it's really hard. And a lot of people need help with that. And that happens to be where I spend most of my time. It's trying to understand why you started the business and what you're trying to go build, and then help you create a really good story. And the story has to feel like there are these existential changes happening in the market. There's going to be winners and losers. And it's kind of either get on board or get left behind. And we are going to be the product that takes you to the promised land. And here's why. And I'm going to give you a bunch of examples. But like when you get to the point where you have some product market fit and you have traction, and you as a founder, whether you're CEO or COO or whatever, are essentially full-time taking meetings, like selling the product, onboarding customers, getting them successful, and you have clear repeatability. Like you have at least, I'd say, this is an arbitrary number, but at least 10 to 20 customers actively using your product in a similar way. There's clear patterns in the value they're getting out of the product and the way they use it. And if you pulled it away from them, they would be kicking and screaming, like they love your product, even if they're not paying. Once you have that and you feel like this is a full-time job, I've proven the story works, the way I get these meetings works, and the way that they get integrated and onboarding and get to value is consistent, and I can go train someone on this. I think it's safe to say at that point, like you can go out and find a salesperson, you can go hire somebody. And there's a bunch of ways to think about how to scale sales and how to go build that. Everybody has their own model. But I think the most important thing is like, how do you draw the line and know when you've sort of reached that threshold where it makes sense to go throw another human at this problem, and go out and hire somebody?
Great advice. And yes, the storytelling piece is so critical, not only for selling, but fundraising, hiring. It's just such a critical piece. And I'm glad. I feel like it's been coming up more in this podcast. So, it's just something that's so critical. It's got to make sense. All right. Outside of work or building Copley, what do you like to do?
I love this. There's a couple things that I'm very passionate about. I love golf. So I golf. I have 3 kids that are 13, 10, and 6. So I certainly don't golf as much as I'd like, but I love golf. Golf as much as I can. I also love the ocean. I spend a lot of time in the summer up in Algonquin, Maine, and we go to the beach as much as we can. I love fishing, love being on the water on a boat, and just love being around the ocean. And I always have been, my entire life. So I'd say fishing, just being on the water, and golf, like my big hobbies.
Well, you,
Yeah.
David.
Like I like fishing a lot, getting even more into it. My trainer has got me like pretty obsessed with fishing over the last like 2 years. I like working out. Lifting weights specifically is something I've really gotten into. Was trying to like set some personal records last year. Now that I have a startup, I just try and go for like maintenance and just keep it good. Outside of work, I have a 7-month-old, so just spend as much time as I can with him. I like playing chess. I like, other stuff like that. I like cooking a lot. I like food. Yeah.
Well, David and Sean, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your journey and all the great work that you've done at Klaviyo. And of course, here's to hopefully building the next great anchor tech company in the Boston tech scene, that being Copley.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith.